Evet, akşama doğru yaklaşıyoruz.
We're approaching the end of today's meeting, one of the two last sessions of the day, the other one in the next hall. We will be speaking about the financing of wind projects. And as an investor, I will be moderating this session, which I particularly enjoy, seeing the banks sitting near me. Of course, I have lots of questions to ask as an investor now that I have caught them here. I will also introduce the panelists to you first of all. And we have Bilgihan, not from the world of finance. We know him from Siemens in the wind sector. He has a long history of energy. Started working for Gamma first in his professional career, then he shifted to the logistics sector. After working for some time there, he then started working for Siemens Gamesa, and we know him from his activities in that company. And now he is working in a slightly different field but still related to energy. It's a family company, Kuzey Insurance Brokers. He is the founding partner in this company, and he's on the insurance side of the issue, so it's related to financing, and I think he will give us interesting information about that. Mr. Yiğit is from the project financing department of Garanti Bank, working particularly in the field of finance management and project procurement, and in the renewable energy sector. If you know the activities of Garanti Bank, I think you would also know Mr. Yiğit. The same goes for Mrs. Gonca Kalkan. Started working for Garanti Bank, then started working for the project financing department. She's the senior manager of project financing in the Turkish Industrial Development Bank, and it is an important financer in this sector. Maybe you know Gonca too. I have seen both of them before, both Yiğit and Gonca actually. Yeşim Akçoğlu is from the World Bank. She started working for the World Bank, then worked in other companies, then went back to work for the World Bank again. She is the senior energy sector representative of World Bank for the last 8 years for Turkey. So we have very distinguished panelists. We will be speaking about project financing for 2018-2019. It is one of the most challenging topics, I think, project financing. Looking back on the past, the energy sector in Turkey, particularly in the last 16 years, has gone through a very important development process. The installed capacity has tremendously increased, and in 2002 it was 32,000 megawatts, and currently 87,000 megawatts, maybe 90,000 megawatts by the end of the year. So it is a very important development, we can say, and particularly in the recent years, last 5 to 6 years, the investments in the renewable energy have increased and reached a very large volume. There is a very large volume of investments in renewable energy. In 2017-18, generally natural gas investments were at the forefront. After 2011, after the wind tenders, the wind energy became interest for the investors. The installed capacity currently is 7,000 megawatts and almost 8% share in total. But there's also a slowdown, deceleration, we can say, after the years that Turkey broke records and was in high ranks in the world, there's some deceleration now, some slowdown in 2018, and we expect this trend to continue in 2019. Delays in the tenders, lack of sustainability, and capacity distribution delays, I think, have been the reasons for this slowdown. But project financing, on the other hand, is at a very important, has reached a very important level because it is the most important factor for the realization of projects. In 2016, there was a research carried out by TÜSİAD, the Industrialists Association. Total energy investment is $105 billion. 20 billion distribution sector, $85 billion manufacturing sector. In the manufacturing sector. Now in 2018, total credit debt is $52 billion for the energy sector. There's still $52 billion that need to be reimbursed, paid back. So almost half of this investment, 44 billion in the manufacturing sector and 11 billion in the distribution sector. Out of this $44 billion, $26 billion is in the renewable energy sector, also including wind energy, naturally, but also hydroelectricity is involved. There are also a high rate of investments in hydroelectricity. The amount of loans that need to be paid per year is $7.2 billion. Out of this, around $3 billion are on the distribution side for natural gas and coal enterprises, and $4.2 billion are to be paid back by the other renewable energy investors who benefited from YEKDEM. In the energy world, there's such a rapid development, and we are paying the bill for this rapid development actually. But we should keep in mind that in renewable energy, the YEKDEM incentive mechanism has been effective. We have witnessed this. This $4.2 billion of repayment per year. Maybe in hydroelectricity centers, plants, there may be some problems, but for the wind plants, it is not a problem. For banks, in the wind energy field, there aren't any problematic loans. I mean, those who drawing the loans are able to pay them back thanks to the YEKDEM mechanism. So the borrowing of the sector is, of course, at a significant level, but for the wind energy, we see there is no difficulty in terms of paying back the loans. But as new practices, implementations are underway, we know that the relevant ministry is taking these into account and will act accordingly. Now, I would like to turn to our panelists. First of all, I would like to ask a question to all of them. They can answer one by one. We can start with Yeşim Akçoğlu. For 2017, where do you think Turkey will be in terms of the energy market? What is waiting for Turkey in 2019? And for financing institutions and investors, what reflections will there be? What are the risks? What are the opportunities, particularly for the investors? What would you recommend so that they can make better use of the opportunities and protect themselves from the risks? So let's start with Yeşim Akçoğlu.
Sayın Başkan.
Thank you very much. Dear moderator, I have a presentation.
Değerli katılımcılar, herkese merhaba.
Hello, distinguished participants. Mehmet Bey evaluated developments in Turkey very well. So in my presentation, I'll be focusing more on global trends, the problems, a little bit of risks and opportunities. And then I'll be speaking about what we do as the World Bank in world wind markets, and I will present you two cases about two countries. And in the second part of this session, I will be focusing on Turkish wind markets and our role as World Bank in the Turkish wind markets. In the last 16 years, Turkey's developments have been summarized by Mehmet Bey, but in the all around the world, in the year 2000, we had a very limited capacity. However, as of the end of 2017, we are talking about 540 gigawatts of capacity. So Turkey accounts for 1.2% of this amount. Asia, Europe, and North America are the pioneering countries. When we have a look at the feature for 3 or 4 years, we can say that the pioneers are still the Asian countries. These are discussed in these sessions as well. I'll be speaking about offshore a little bit and our position in the global market, the risks and opportunities. In offshore wind, as you may know, there is a 19 gigawatts of capacity, which is expected to be increasing in a speedy manner. I will show you a graphics. UK, Denmark, Germany, are among significant countries. There are huge investments on clear technology. 10% of the investment, nearly $30 billion, are allocated to these investments. Offshore is growing day by day, and there are some reasons. One of the reasons is that prices are going down. Offshore's prices are nearly equal to the onshore prices 10 years ago. So we can speak about a price decrease, especially in recent years. Turbine sizes are growing and they become more efficient, which is a reason behind that growth. And in the market, there are large companies, bigger players. Some of their names are mentioned, but you know all of them. Now, these companies are interested in offshore wind energy as well. That is why there is an accelerated growth in this sector. By 2030 and 2050, for long-term trends, the prices will go down even further, which is about the increase in the land costs in onshore. There are some countries where offshore is not popular, like Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and India. Offshore will gain momentum and there will be a speed up process. There are huge plans in Turkey for onshore and offshore tenders, and this will be continued, I believe. Offshore alone, the prices are going down, the turbines are getting bigger. However, it brings about some challenges as well. For infrastructure, there is a need for huge support for ports and for other areas. There is a need, there is a seismic risk. If you keep the sizes smaller, the costs will not go down. So having larger sizes are required, which also entails cooperation. As the World Bank, what do we do? Well, World Bank is not only a financial institution, but we are a development bank. Of course, we provide financing to all energy projects and other sectors as well, and also wind energy. For wind energy, we provide financing to investments. However, World Bank is not only limited to these supports. We provide significant technical support assistance to governments, to institutions, to companies. But we also have a development policy loan, which is directly granted to the governments and which is serving for speeding up reform processes to take action in these reform processes. In Turkey, we used it very frequently in supporting energy reforms. The fourth area which we are active is the guarantees. We are a development bank, so our maturity periods are longer and times without return payback are longer. However, we have some limitations. We cannot reach and find every project. However, if we are speaking about bonds and securities, we can opt for reducing the costs, and there are examples all around the world. In terms of policy, in terms of supporting reforms, wind sector, we assumed important duties in wind sectors across the world. There are so many countries examples, but I can give you some examples. In China, in the program to increase renewables, in the second phase, we made contributions, pricing of renewable energies, tender mechanisms. For other systems, we provided recommendations, and in terms of integrating renewable to the system, we provided assistance and support. And offshore wind and microgrid technology standards are also involved in this project. Efficiency increasing mechanisms are also involved in this project. So both for policy assistance and technical assistance, we as the World Bank are involved, and this is an ongoing project in China, the example I mentioned. Financing, technical assistance, reform support, and guarantee instruments are the four main pillars of World Bank, in addition to other sectors. In Argentina, we have used renewable fund guarantee. If there is a shortage or problem, our guarantee mechanism will kick in, and there are also country risks which can entail problems in the payback or some loans, problems in the loans. So in order to minimize these risks, the impacts of these risks, we introduced a guarantee mechanism. When we speak about the World Bank Group, I am a manager of IBRD, but IFC is included as well. IBRD, we are working with public and private sector through governments, and we need sovereign guarantees. IFC is our sister institution, which is working directly with private sector, which I will be telling some examples in the second round. So all around the world, they are supporting private sector projects, including wind projects. What do we do in Turkish energy markets? We have 4 pillars and 4 instruments that we are using. Since 1950s, we are active in the Turkish energy sector, although there was no World Bank office back then. In the 80s and 90s, in the last 20 years, we can say that we have taken an active position. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, gas and electricity investments are our main topics of interest, but this includes electricity investments to renewable energies, strengthening grid and smart grid investments, digitalization investments. So such support mechanisms are also available by us. And in the process of supporting reforms, we have an active role. We have completed some projects in the last 5 years. You can see them in the slide. $1.3 billion worth of project is completed. TKP and Turkish Industrial Development Bank actually was one of our partners. With Turkish Electricity Transmission Corporation, we also completed an infrastructure investment to support infrastructure. When it comes to technical assistance, we can say that we assume an active role for rooftop solar systems and energy efficiency, corporate structure creation and introduction of corporate mechanisms, and also the energy transitions in Turkey, the challenges and opportunities. Regarding these challenges and opportunities, we provided technical assistance, and $740,000 worth of technical assistance was provided by us, together with the reports and together with other works. Our existing current portfolio is 6.2 billion, $2.6 billion in the energy sector, and actually I'm honored to be a part of widening storage in Salt Lake, and there are some other similar gas projects. And to SMEs, Halk, Vakıf, and Ziraat banks, through these banks, we provided support to SMEs and integration of renewable by Turkish Electricity Distribution Corporation. We are conducting a project, and we also have other analysis and reports on integration of renewables, manufacturing planning, its optimization to cover renewable. We have an ongoing project, and we also have another project to enhance the options. $1.5 billion worth of technical assistance is ongoing by our side. Now, in the second round, I'll be speaking about what we do, especially in Turkish wind sector. Thank you.
Çok teşekkür ederim.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Yeşim, for the detailed information. World Bank is not providing direct financing for private sector projects, of course, but in the energy sector, they have very important activities in Turkey that you have very successfully shared with us. The technical aspect is what I'm particularly interested in. Technical assistance to projects. Infrastructure development or large projects are there, but in addition to this, there is also technical assistance. And guarantees to minimize risks are also considered. You mentioned that. It is very important because it is directly reflected in financing costs. Now let us proceed with Mrs. Gonca. What do you think about the current situation? And for 2019, what opportunities and risks will be for investors in the energy market?
Finansman sağlayan bir kuruluş.
You're the official of an institution which directly finances them. Information about electricity market was given. I would like to emphasize one more point. In 2018, 2,750 megawatts of capacity were based on renewable energy, and YEKDEM was thanks to YEKDEM. For financing, actually, we didn't have other projects, and those previous projects could only be implemented in 2018. And today, power plants who benefit from YEKDEM is around 23,000. And we here have a system of YEKDEM which is very valuable for us. So for 2019, YEKDEM will continue until 2020. So for 2019, I think these projects who make use of YEKDEM will come to us, will apply to us. For beyond 2020, at least the current prices and incentive mechanism will not continue. We know that. And for project financing, we particularly pay attention to the electricity sales price. And in terms of that, so far until now we had YEKDEM, and in terms of revenue, the investor had to just determine the production ratio, and those investors who are currently developing projects beyond 2020, we really are wondering what the electricity sale prices will be. I think there will be studies carried out to determine that. And another issue is that at the beginning of 2010s, the financing costs were low. There were so many funds in the market, national, international, and the financing costs were thus very low. And the feasibilities were affected positively by that. But nowadays, these costs are higher. And at the financing level, at the financing phase, when we do the feasibility studies, generally there's a negative impact and the feasibility of the investments are affected. And the build, operate, transfer model, and there are some power plants who are prioritized, but this will end, and I think in the future this may also have an effect. About the currency, foreign currency, in 2018 there was such a fluctuation, and we all noticed the importance of the foreign currency, and the renewable energies particularly. Generally investments are in foreign currency and revenues are in foreign currency, so it had a sort of balance within itself. I think a similar system should continue. We expect a similar system to continue in the future, and for YEKDEM and other mechanisms in dollars, and hedging euro and Turkish lira costs would be, I think, right. If the hedging systems are right, then in terms of financing, those customers will be more advantageous. From the financing side of the issue, first, maybe I should give you some information about the Turkish Industrial Development Bank. It is the one and only development bank of Turkey, and 75% of its portfolio is investment loans. And because we are generally extending investment loans, looking at the 6.5 years is the average maturity of the loans we are providing. And so far, what did we do in the field of renewable energy? Our financing started in 2002 with the hydroelectricity, and so far we have financed many projects, and the projects we have financed account for 15% of the installed capacity of Turkey. And for wind energy, we financed 30 projects so far, 1,300 megawatts, and 85% of the megawatts of the projects that we have financed have been operational, have been commissioned, and 245 megawatts, I can say. And of course, there was a domination of hydroelectricity, but in 2018, from the third quarter, now the wind energy plant is number one, and I think this is an important indication of our support for the wind power plants as the Industrial Development Bank. And in the upcoming period, with the right investment, right project, right environmental sensitivities, we will be continuing to extend loans. And as the development bank, our funds are generally supplied from international financing institutions, and in the field of energy we have lots of proper resources, we can say, for renewable energy, and IBRD is one of the most important financiers for us. Actually, it has a share of 37% in our funding. Still, in 2016 and 2018, $550 million of new loans have been drawn from IBRD, and in 2016, in terms of sustainability and environmental awareness, 300 million euro bonds have been imported, and we have used it in many projects. And last year, the first for sustainability, we made the first, and the amount that we received, the loan that we received last year, we have extended this to our projects. So 2018 was a difficult year for banks as well. But in addition to the fund from IBRD, from AIRD, we received a financing of $200 million, and it is the Asian Development Bank. It was the first time that they extended a loan to another development bank for extension to some sub actors in the market. And JVRC, BRD, IFC, also from these institutions, we are able to provide energy team loans. So when we talk about resources, of course there are expectations. We can ensure funding from international financing institutions, but there are some certain criteria that the investors have to meet. And these criteria will not be any easier, will not get any easier in 2019. These should be projects with environmental sensitivities, noise emissions and bird migration routes and expropriations. These will be taken into account. Financial analysis and engineering departments are very important, and in 2005 a new model was established. According to this model, 45 questions have to be answered to determine the environmental sensitivity of the project. Our engineers are visiting sites, on-field visits, on-site visits. They make a categorization considering the social and environmental characteristics, and they have a rating. So we take all of these into account, and for these funds from abroad, international financing institutions, we are acting as a bridge and extending the funds to the actors in the market. So those with the right feasibility and right social and environmental criteria will continue to receive loans from us in 2019.
Evet, çok teşekkürler Gonca Hanım.
Thank you very much. Gonca Kalkan. Your difference from other banks is that you work more like a development bank rather than a deposit bank. And you have access to these international funds because cash is hard to find nowadays, and you have access to some cash sources. It is very important. And on the other hand, as an investor, I can read between the lines of your speech that you will assess projects in a much more diligent manner in 2019, in the upcoming period. So the environmental conditions, requirements, social requirements will all be taken into account by the banks. They will make a more detailed analysis of these, of the criteria. As investors, we always complain about the administrative procedures being too lengthy and the permission process being too lengthy. However, if the investors acts in the right way, then financing will be easier to find for that specific investor. Of course, the right project should be developed in the right way with the right sensitivities. You're right. So I will ask the same question to Yiğit, Mr. Yiğit. Garanti Bank is a deposit bank. So about this problem of cash in the current period, what can you say about investors and the financing institutions? What can you say about them? Thank you. At the beginning of the presentation, you provided very detailed information. First of all, let me give you some figures for Garanti Bank and the resource allocation of Garanti Bank to the sector, and then I will be speaking about the energy sector in general and then dwell on the wind sector. I will start from general and continue with the wind sector. Looking at Garanti Bank, we are, I think, number one bank in terms of resource allocation, loan allocation to energy. $11 billion of fund has been extended so far. $8.5 billion has been extended to energy generation sector. And this $8.5 billion, 60% of this were extended to renewable energy projects. And out of this 60%, I think around 50%, $2.5 billion have been been extended for wind power plants. So as Garanti Bank, I can say our focus is on renewable energies and particularly wind energies. And I think it is a very striking piece of information that one out of every three wind power plants under operation, Garanti Bank has provided the financing for one out of every three wind power plants under operation. And this leadership, we want to maintain this, and we want to allocate more resources to renewable energy in Turkey. But of course, we should have a look at the general energy sector to understand the problems in this sector. In the last 16 years, there have been very important investments. The installed power has increased from 30 to 80,000 megawatts, and $85 billion was invested in the electricity generation sector. And for this amount, $60 billion of financing have been provided by banks, generally Turkish banks. The credit risk is around $40 billion right now. $25 billion for renewable energy power plants, and remaining $15 billion for merchants, or the thermic power plants as we call it. And so we should look from two perspectives, I think, because the stories are very different in the two different stories. The $15 billion natural gas sectors, local and international coals, power plants. So these, when we consider them, there is a supply increase in the sector and the electricity prices are decreasing. Therefore, in these power plants, there is serious problem. And for this $15 billion of loans, some of them have been restructured. For some, structuring continues, as you can see in the media. These merchant power plants are important because from 2002 until today, in that process, the banks, contrary to the European banks, undertook the market risk and provided financing. The European banks, however, never undertake market risk, and they only provide financing if there's purchasing guarantee of the project. But the Turkish banks, maybe out of some sort of excitement or lack of experience, didn't ask for this guarantee, and the electricity price fell from 7 or 8 cents to 4.5 cents, and there was thus a problem. So we should keep this in mind, actually, because in the upcoming period, merchant wind projects will be on our agenda. There will be both price risks and manufacturing risks. So there will be double risks. So how will the banks act in this? Maybe we can talk about this in the second round. In the $15 billion side, there's a whole different story. And compared to the general sector in general, we have a more optimistic point of view. And for those $15 billion of loans that were extended, I think we reached the bottom, and I think now there will be a sort of a recovery in this sector. And so there was excessive supply, and it has started decreasing now because the increase in demand has increased, yes, but in the field, in terms of supply, I think we don't have large projects underway, and oil prices have fallen down from $100 to $30. It is now around $70, $80. I think it will fluctuate between 70 to 80, and it will be reflected in electricity prices. The average price was $4.5 last year, but now it is $5.5. So there's almost a 20% increase on dollar basis. And as Gonca mentioned, build, operate, transfers led to an abnormality in the system. They had less efficiency, but they were still prioritized. Their contracts will be finalized, will end in 2019, and I think then the electricity prices will be increasing, and this is the third factor, and it will support the recovery in the market, in my opinion. And the $25 billion of loans for renewable energy, when if I should say something about that, apart from the hydro plants, $2 to $2.5 billion is their worth. I think for the remaining part, there is no need for structuring of the loans because YEKTA mechanism is working very effectively. This $25 billion of loan credit risk in this wind has a share of $7 to $8 billion, and for wind, the problem we don't have any project for which we had to restructure the loan because of problems in the project. So this shows how effective YEKTAM is operating. And what did the banks do? On the merchant side, the electricity price was uncertain. You had a feasibility of maybe $7-8 but then the price fell down to $4.5, and for the wind power plants, the banks had a guarantee provided by YEKNAM mechanism. There was a base price always. Even at the worst scenario, $7.8 would be there, and even if no one used the YEKNAM mechanism, then still I think the electricity price would be affected and the banks would be on the safe side. So YEKDAM should continue for current power plants who are already under operation. And in the wind sector, there are more than two types of projects. 2 years ago, for every wind power plants, we could say $7.8 or a higher price if there's local contribution. But now we have three different types of projects for the wind energy. First, there are power plants who were licensed previously and who can use YEKDAM. We have YEKA as the second type, and the third type is the type that the contest was made last year. These are new wind power plant licenses, some of which are merchants. And these all should be considered separately in terms of financing or in terms of challenges. And in the Energy Market Regulatory Authority's website, the licensed wind power capacity is 10,000 megawatts, but the installed capacity is 6,800 megawatts. So we have an additional 3,000 megawatts which can be commissioned, and it should be commissioned until the end of 2020. So 2019 is very critical year from that perspective, but there are some problems in terms of access to financing. Let me speak about those in the second round.
Tabii, hay. Yiğit Bey, evet.
Sure. As Yiğit Bey mentioned, Guarantee Bank is among the top financial institutions which provides the higher amount of supports in the renewables and wind energy sector. You mentioned very interesting things. First of all, different from Europe, banks in Turkey in the development phase of energy markets, as a result of a huge interest by the private sector and huge investments for natural gas, for coal, especially for natural gas, and Turkish banks, market price risks have been undertaken by Turkish banks, which is not the case in Europe. Maybe in the second round of this session we can talk in detail. In Europe, long-term PPAs are there for 10 years, for 15 years. So these purchasing agreements for these power plants, for the phase of financing, such pricing for 10 years, 15 years is possible. But in Turkey, I haven't seen a period covering more than 1 year. It's very difficult to see ahead in Turkey after 1 year or 2 years. This is a significant resource. So with the liberalization of energy trade, with the deepening of trade, we hope and we believe that we will see that in our future, but we need some time to see it. Another point in terms of WPPs, There are three types of projects, those which can benefit from YEKDEM. 2019 is very critical. If construction is not started by 2019, there won't be any opportunity to benefit from YEKDEM. There's a huge project portfolio that is open there. But of course, with the advancement of technology, economically reasonable projects will be implemented. Second one is about YEKAS. $3.48 is on the agenda. Future YEKAS, we will see what will happen in the future of YEKAS, but today's market price is it is $2 lower than the current market price, and we're speaking about long-term period like 15 years, and it means that there is negative pricing for 10 years, not only for market price, but that price is lower than the market price. This is around 2,850 megawatts as a result of these tenders, and most of them we are talking about negative prices, not only market risks, but we are speaking about market price, dollar denominated market price. We will develop on all these in our second round. Now, we have a speaker outside of financial world, but which is an important component of financial world, being an insurance world. Now, Bilgehan Bey will be speaking about the developments in the insurance sector. He will be speaking about challenges and opportunities. Thank you very much, dear Chairman. In between 2009 2019, as mentioned by Yiğit Bey, and as we all know, as the investors of wind sector, is a very critical period for the existing projects. This is a portfolio of 3,500 megawatts, which is going to be commissioned before the end of YEKDEM mechanism. I've been working in the wind turbine sector as a sales manager for many years. The biggest problem for the investors was the financing. And we, in this sector, always tried our best to support investors, and we were engaged in the brainstorming with them, especially for small-scaled investors. This was very important. In the wind sector, there was a very good YEKDEM mechanism, which is the case for other renewables, but we have a very good functioning YEKDEM mechanism in the wind sector. While we have it in the wind sector, as mentioned by Yiğit Bey, none of the projects, none of the investors were in default, went bankrupt. I am not in favor of non-recourse project financing mechanism. YEKDEM mechanism will come to an end within a year. And as a parameter in the wind power plant, wind is a variable, is a risk in front of us. And there are different insurance products like parametric insurance, which is available for a few years in the market, which is prepared and produced by world insurance companies. So wind volatility insurance actually eliminates that parameter. So a wind power plant, apart from bureaucratic and political risks, has no risks. So even in that scenario, currently in Turkey, we as investors, as shareholders, like 85% of a VPP, WPP is the wind turbines. So we in Turkey should compel wind turbine producers Exim Bank, ECLs, we should convince them, we should talk to them, because investments are in a difficult situation when there is a high rate of interest. So in some way, these investments should be made, or YEKTEM, the wind power plants which do not fall under YEKTEM, there will be problems. So it means that there is a market risk and wind risk in the market. Wind risk can be eliminated by insurance products. However, there will be the market risk that is there. So without being too late, non-recourse project financing by the investors, by the turbine producers, it should be underlined, it should be taken into account. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Project financing in Turkey, non-recourse project financing. The financing type in which the project itself is the guarantor is not used very frequently. However, when we have YEKTEM mechanism available, we expect that this should have been used more frequently. So there is a limited number of projects that are using these non-recourse project financing, but I also of the opinion that it will be even more difficult in the future. I agree with you. And in regards to the wind volatility insurance, I can say that this does not exist in Turkey. So in the second round, we will hear your opinions about that insurance system, which is not available in Turkey, because it's important for our investors, especially its impacts on financing is very important. We observe it from the examples in Europe. In our second round of discussions, I'll start with Yiğit Bey and ask a question to him. Recently, you gave the details. There are projects which can benefit from YEKTEM, like 3,000, 3,500 megawatts of projects which have been licensed but which have not been commissioned yet. Financing of these projects is normally an easy one if the project is developed properly, if the wind and manufacturing conditions are reasonable, if they can be supported by various reports, then there won't be any risk, significant risk for banks. But of course, there we have to take into account political, other environmental and social risks. But we know that there is a shortage of cash in the market. So for these projects specifically, in 2019, what kind of financing opportunities will there be, and what are the opportunities for investors?
Yani bu yektemden
Yes,
faydalanan projelerin
projects benefiting from YEKTEM,
herhangi bir sıkıntı yaşamasını biz
we do not think that they will suffer in terms of finances, project financing. So for liquidity,
sorun olduğunu söyleyemeyiz.
I can't say that banks have problems and they can channel liquidity to the market, because the risk is not very high for YEKTEM. It can be 3,000 megawatts at the highest. So $2.5 billion of financing, when we take into account the size of the banking sector, we cannot say that this is significant. So their financing will not be problematic from liquidity terms. But the biggest problem lies in the cost of financing, because up until today, although financing costs may seem high for the investors, LIBOR plus 4, 5, 6 were the financial costs. However, in the recent fluctuation in the economy, financing costs unfortunately have reached to double digits. both for euro, both for dollar. If you are to get a long-term credit loan, the interest rates are around 10 to 12%, which means that banks are also reflecting their costs as well. So it means that there is an increase in the interest rates for financing, providing financing. We wished that none of this had happened in 2019. I believe that we could have seen a huge increase. However, due to all these developments, it may not be possible. Financing, funding, if it is based on deposits, if loans are taken from abroad, then we can say that the situation is like that. And in the short term periods, we cannot unfortunately see a sharp decline, but there it also entails a risk of missing YEKDEM. So especially EBRD, like IFC, especially EBRD, has channeled significant resources to these projects, to wind projects. You have to go and knock on their door because their costs and the pricing is better for them. Up until today, these projects were financed by ECA banks. You go to ECA banks, and 80% of your foreign or exported equipment, you get a loan, and in return for that, you get a guarantee from a Turkish bank, and you give that letter of guarantee to the foreign bank, and little interest rate is introduced by foreign banks. Actually, since 85% of export equipment is provided, then you could easily get a financing. But going to ECA banks is important because ECA financing for the time being, there might be some problems time to time, but when you get an external guarantee from a bank and when you receive a low interest rate loan, then it means that you are able to receive a loan with lower interest rates. So what about the cost of financial loan, financial credits? Unfortunately, it will be very high. If you have a strong sponsor, which does not want to undertake that cost and go with the financing cost, so other methods can be used. But when it comes to Turkish banks, financing costs are in these levels. There are three types of projects in wind that should be taken into account by YEKDEM. And YEKA mainly focuses on working with foreign banks, so Turkish banks were not on the agenda. If they had been taken into account last year, I'm speaking on behalf of Turkish banks, then it would have been easier for us to find a financing. And the third pillar, of course, Mehmet Bey will ask it to other participants as well. In the new auctions, in the auctions with underbidding methods, with negative pricing, we will see what will happen. So we have a problem in merchant prices, and we do not have an appetite to create new merchant financing. Like 80% of credits, 10 or 15 months of years of maturity. So this financing structure, we have to move away from that structure because there is no purchasing guarantee. We need higher equities, and by the end of the day, bank will focus on the cheapest price for electricity, and after identifying it, after making the sensitivity analysis, then they can grant you loans. That risk cannot be undertaken by banks alone. That price risk should be undertaken also by the shareholders, turbine manufacturers. As I mentioned before, both in YEKTEM projects and in other projects, it's important to find cheap resources. Resorting to ECA, EBRD are important. Use of MIDCEFs and other
Paris Anlaşması sonrasında
sectors are important. After Paris Treaty, Turkey's renewable energy investment, to increase these investments, there are foreign funds that can encourage these investments. We have to attract them here. We know that the public sector is working for it, and the Development Bank is also working to attract these foreign incentives and bringing them to Turkey. And financing should be undertaken somehow by turbine manufacturers. ECA plus
ticari kredi yapısıyla hibrit
commercial
kredi
credits
yapısıyla çok
like
fazla
hybrid
müşteri
projects from
finansmanı
now on
sağlarken
will be
şirketler açısından
focusing
gerekli
on
ucuz
ECA financing
maliyetli finansman
plus
şeklinde
low
desteklense
cost
gerekiyor.
financing from
Burada Türkiye
turbine
gerçekten ciddi
manufacturers. So I can say
sorumluluk
that there is a huge
Onlar
responsibility on the shoulders of
onların
turbine
connection'larını,
manufacturers,
bağlantılarını
because
kurarak
by using their own
Türk
connection
kaynaklı
it
finansmanı
will be
sağlaması
possible to
lazım.
find
Buradaki
credits from
finansman
abroad
sağlandığı
with
gibi
low interest rates for non-recourse.
I've been attending these congresses for 3 years, and non-recourse has been on the agenda, that the banks do not extend non-recourse financing. 2,000, 2,500 megawatts, even more than that, is the financing we provided for the wind sector. And looking at the operational projects, commissioned projects so far, apart from one or two of them, all of those are non-recourse. So speaking for Guarantee Bank, our expectation is that if you're able to prevent all the project risks, then you can give non-recourse. But we have electricity price guarantee in YEKTEM. So if you don't have price risk, then you can reach non-recourse. And manufacturing risk, there are some insurances, and the banks can undertake the risk, production risk, because in the wind there's no significant fluctuation, but for hydro we are taking some risk and making some restructuring, but it is important to prevent the investment risks. So there was no bankable turnkey EPC contract, and if we have such an EPC contract, then why wouldn't we talk about non-recourse financing at the project phase? So it is important to give the guarantee to the bank that the EPC, there's an EPC contract with a single contractor, and he will be responsible for increases in cost if that is the case, because if the cost increase is not met, is not undertaken, then who will take that risk? It cannot be the bank. The bank wouldn't undertake that risk for cost increase. If the sponsor cannot undertake that risk, he should provide some guarantees. We give non-recourse project financing at the operation phase. Almost all of them are non-recourse financing. And the credit size is $50 billion. So which company can you take a guarantee to meet this cost of $50 billion? Because even if you have the guarantee, you depend on the project. For the thermic plants, generally looking at the projects, in most of them the project owners have guarantees, but it's not working. And the project financing, when we speak about this, the banks rely on the project, trust the project. So which guarantor or which mortgage would be sufficient for the $50 billion of price? So what you say is non-recourse is being provided because we are providing non-recourse because the guarantees aren't working. I think this is what you said. You said other important things. There's no liquidity problem, particularly for YEKTEM projects in the future. I think the problem is not about having access to the loan, but about the cost of it. And for foreign currency, 11-12% and maybe higher interest rates are the case. And in order for a project to pay back this loan, we can say it would be very difficult. Minimum 10 years, 12 years, 14 years is the period of the loans for wind energy projects. So such a flow of cash is very difficult to ensure for the project. That is why you say they should go to EBRD rather than coming to you. This is what I get. For these types of projects, I mean, they should go to EBRD. And about the use of ECA, of course, the use of foreign banks, there may be a decreasing cost by applying to foreign banks, and in terms of ECA, the risk factor of Turkey is increasing, therefore there was an increasing cost in parallel. For some ECAs, and particularly for countries important in the wind sector, there is a problem, serious problem about the ECAs. I hope it will be overcome. And apart from that, those projects outside the ECDEM, those projects who have a market price risk, for them project financing may not be possible, then the turbines manufacturers may step in and investors may step in to increase the amount of capital. Again, another interesting point, EPC in the wind sector, because there isn't EPC, then there's no real non-recourse project. For the operation phase, it's okay, but the banks do not want to undertake the risk of the project phase. And another topic that we keep discussing, whether the wind sector is compliant with EPC, it is suitable for EPC, is it a sector that needs EPC, because are the risks in the wind sector very serious risks? I think so far you haven't had much of a problem about the projects in the wind sector. So maybe the investor companies did a good job dealing with the problems in this period. And now I would like to turn to Gonca and ask my question. Projects outside the scope of YEKDEM. For these projects, I mean, I'm not looking just from the Turkish point of view. In all the projects in the recent years for the wind and solar energy sector, we see that the prices determined are very low. Particularly, there is a market risk being undertaken in some countries. The market price plus what will be achieved is the subject of the tender. Sometimes some investors say the market price is sufficient for me, and we see very low costs. It's something like $2.4. These are the prices in the markets in some countries for wind and even lower for solar energy. So in general terms, in the financing sector, there's such a problem. The market risk, it may be, I think, even more advantages looking at the prices. There will be need for funding in the energy sector, and for these are large investments actually. No one is doing these investments with their own equity capital, and we cannot expect it to be so. It is the case all over the world, so there will be need for financing, although there is a high level of equity. And in Turkey also, we had a portfolio like this, and as a result of YEKA, the price was very low in Turkey, similarly 3.48, and we heard that YEKA projects would continue. Additional 2,000 megawatts of application would be received for licensing in 2020, and so for those, I think, projects, similar price levels would be established. And so how will you provide financing for projects of this kind? Do you have any recommendations for solutions? I think the finance world has not realized this shock yet. They are not very aware of this, but this is the point that the renewable energy sector has reached. The market price or lower than the market price will be there for the investments. How do you think it will be financed? Thank you. In 2017, there were capacity tenders. Let me start with them. X prices were generally there, and in terms of average, $0.11 x $0.11 was the average. So there are three motivations of investors in these tenders. First one is the spot electricity prices. They expect these prices to increase in the future. Second, turbine and panels for wind. The investment costs have decreased and will continue to decrease as they expected. Third, the foreign financing can be sought and found, and so for 85% equipment financing they can get from international institutions, so it may become more feasible. This was the expectation. So looking from this perspective, the second point is right, turbine costs. When we started wind power plant financing for the first time, now we can see the turbine costs are decreasing, have decreased a lot. So, however, considering ECA abroad, external guarantee was the topic of discussion by many of our customers, and we said we did direct lending and there was no need for guarantees. This was what it used to be, but now I think in terms of international institutions there are some problems with the limits. So our customers are going abroad, looking for financing abroad, and in the Turkish market, looking at the financing costs and the feasibility studies. Generally, the investors would quit. So we didn't have any investors applying to us because they know the market conditions and they are trying to find loans abroad. And there, I would like to make an additional comment. The local contribution share isn't the case for capacity tenders, and due to the financing costs, of course, investors are choosing to opt for foreign funding, so foreign loans. So the manufacturing is also shifting abroad and looking at local manufacturing. In the capacity tenders, we don't have much of local manufacturing, but in order to preserve local manufacturing, of course, there was a local requirement, a localization requirement. Looking at YEKA's, 2,000 megawatts of tenders for solar and wind energy were made last year. Compared to YEKDAM, the cost was lower, and we continue to search for financing. And as Guarantee Bank representative said, R&D and factory investments are there, so we consider YEKA projects to be very viable for financing and feasible for financing. EPC contracts. Let me make a few points for turbine suppliers. They should put their hands under the stone, so they should take the risk. For EPC contractors, they can do this in the wind energy as well, and for EPCF also including the financing in the sector, investors I think may find these to be very attractive. For the new YEKAs, compared to the YEKAs of 2017, the R&D and factory investment will not be there for the new YEKAs. So I think even though similar prices were achieved in the tender, feasibility will leave some room for the investors. This is my opinion. And since there is the Paris Agreement and Turkey is waiting for that, and there are new plans, new strategies for growth in the wind sector, and we consider this to be very positive steps. And for the coal power plants, there's a sort of growth, and in these sectors we expect a growth too. I don't have any additional comments about YEKAS.
Çok teşekkürler Gonca Hanım. Burada aslında şunu biraz dile getirdiniz.
You said that the turbine costs are decreasing, efficiency is increasing, and for wind power plants, unit energy price, unit energy cost is decreasing. This is an important factor. Therefore, these prices are there all over the world. And for the Turkish investors, you say they expect the price to improve, and they also wish to have more access to international financing. So they look for ways to get international financing. And of course, all of these are important for these prices today. But in the whole market is full of projects of this kind. In this environment, what will the banks do? What kind of financial sources will they find? The credit equity rate, of course, is important. If it's suitable, then we can provide financing. 80% loan rates, when we actually reduce them, of course, on project basis, we should consider this. It may be feasible. I cannot say it's impossible, but also for the investors, when we consider their amount of equity, then will the investment be feasible for them? This is another question. So for the short term, we don't have a solution for Turkey, I think. And in the short term, these aren't short-term investments. I think we will start discussing these investments after 2020. And I hope that until then, the markets will improve and operate in a better way. On the other hand, for the YEKAs, for the first YEKA, domestic financing wasn't sought, and they sought international financing. And I heard you say that although it is very low, there should be a guarantee price and it will facilitate financing. The market price risk shouldn't be undertaken totally, so there should be such a guarantee, and it will make the project financing easier. So the YEKA model, the projects with the YEKA model may come to you. So we have a hope that with YEKA projects we can come to you, apply to your bank. Mr. Bilgehan, I will give the last say to Yeşim, but now I would like to leave the floor to Mr. Bilgehan. He talked about the wind volatility insurance. It is important for financing and financing costs. The risks of the project are important for financing, of course. During the construction, there are risks about the administrative process, there are risks, and about the operation, there are risks. And for particularly a sector like wind, there may be fluctuations in production from one year to the other. So whether there's wind or not, it will change everything. So 1 year it's a very good year in terms of wind, but the other year there's drought maybe, and in I think it was 2014 there was drought, and in Western Turkey there was no wind. It was a lot below the average for many years in 2014. So there may be these sorts of meteorological events which affect the sector. And for these, what is your recommendation for solution? Of course, on the financing side, there may be some facilities that may be offered. Thank you. I actually have a presentation about this with graphs, and it is an insurance product. Can you please show my presentation on the screen?
Ee, ya son birkaç yılda çıkan bir sigorta.
It is a new type of insurance, just a few years old.
Dünyanın reasürans şirketlerinin
The reassurance companies of the world, two of the largest ones, have offered such products, this insurance, but there is no very high penetration into the market. There are examples of this insurance implementation abroad, but it is not available in the Turkish market yet. It has a few different names: lack of wind or wind volatility insurance, as we call it. As Kuzey Insurance Brokers, we have started launching this product in the wind market. Let me give you some information about our company. Established in 2005, Kuzey Insurance and Reassurance Brokers, particularly in Navy, Marine, we provide high quality, sustainable solutions to our investors. Our services are listed here: energy insurances, engineering insurances, and equipment, machinery breakdown, risk management, and legal counseling are the services that we provide. Also about indemnities. So you can see here the risks in power plant investments. There's a risk during the construction. And during the operational period, there are risks, and of course, there's a risk from the nature of the wind, uncertainty about the amount of wind, and there is also a market risk. For years, the price risk was eliminated by YEKDEM. After YEKDEM, some derivative instruments may be introduced to eliminate the risk. But there is one risk that is not covered. It is about the nature of wind. Maybe too much wind or lack of wind may lead to loss of production. And political bureaucratic risks are also there. So when there's lack of wind, we all know this formula. You can see the power curve here. All investors in the sector know this. When there's a lack of wind, then energy production will suffer from a loss of 5% and or 15% for a 30 megawatts power plant, 24% CF, let's say, and the electricity sale price is $100 per megawatt hours, then you will have a revenue loss of $1 million. This will be your loss only from a decrease in the speed of wind by 5%. There are examples abroad. There are different firms who have suffered great revenue loss due to the lack of wind. And conglomerates, large energy companies have a large portfolio, so therefore if they are concentrated in one region and if there's a lack of wind there, then they may have lots of revenue loss and it would affect the company as a whole. This is from Vortex firm for 2014. In western Turkey, there was a wind anomaly. So this is a map of that wind anomaly. You can see up to 30% of decrease in production occurred, and in terms of loan paybacks, it would put the investor at a very difficult, tight spot. It's a type of insurance actually. This type of insurance, the wind volatility insurance, is hedging this in a sense and providing a guarantee. How does this work? How does this type of insurance work?
İlk önce yatırımcı böyle bir risk elimine ettiği zaman
First,
sigorta
when this
kullanıcıyla
risk is
konuşup
eliminated, the investor and the insurance company share data.
dediğimiz yatırımda kullandığı,
The
sigorta
investors'
hizmetlerinde kullandığı raporu
bankable report
sigortacıyla paylaşıyor.
is
Sigortacı
shared with the
bu
broker,
raporu kendi
and then
bağımsız uydu
the
verileriyle,
broker
rüzgar verileriyle doğruluyor. Sonra
confirms this
üretim
report by data from the satellite,
bir anlaşmaya
and
karşılıklı
then
olarak
they make
müzakere
an
edildikten sonra
agreement after
tamamladıktan sonra
negotiations, after both sides
üretim
are
belli bir zamanlık
convinced,
üretim miktarı
then
anlaşılıyor.
they agree on an
Bu
annual
üretim miktarı
amount of
burada
production.
gördüğünüz üzere belli bir
As you
maliyeti
can see in this example, there is a certain level of exemption, of course. And if the production is below a certain level, according to an assessment by the end of the year based on correlation methods and satellite data, an assessment is made, then the investor makes a demand for his loss, and the broker evaluates this demand, makes an assessment, and the bankable report is also taken as the basis. And when there is a damage, when there is a loss of this kind, then the insurance company will automatically pay this. This is called parametric insurance in the sector, and it will become available in Turkey as well. So why should we assure this risk? These loss of production, decrease in production, as you can see here, it is a long projection for 20 years, and it is becoming smooth over the years. There is no real loss of revenue, and then the investor starts believing in his own investment. He believes that he won't make a big loss over the years. And for large companies who have concentrated their wind power plants in a certain region, and when there is a lack of wind in that region, the revenue of the company is affected, and there's also the stock exchange price is being affected, and the rating is affected for Turkish companies. And the second effect is the financing effect. During the investment phase of the project, P90, P99, P84, P75, and P50, these are all the figures which are being assessed by the investors, by the feasibility teams, and with the banks, and generally the banks, maybe also Yiğit Bey and other colleagues would confirm P84, P90, sometimes P99 values are used for deciding on funding for the project. To give an example, P75 may be increased to P90, or P80 may reach the manufacturing level of P90 with this type of insurance. In the most popular examples, P84 is increased to P99, and the value of P75 can be considered as the value of P99. And the debt service coverage ratio is also increasing at the beginning of the investment. So when you get the same value of P75 by P of P90 by to P75, then you have an increase in your revenue turnover, and the interest rates for the project will also be better. Also, for power plants under operation, they can benefit from this type of insurance. The finance markets have difficulty nowadays for refinancing, but I think in the future it will have a good impact, positive influence on refinancing. So refinancing can be made under more favorable conditions for the power plants under operation in the future. So the interest rates will also be more advantageous for the investor, which is very important because the interest rates are very high currently. This is the situation analysis. This is a base project, and you can see the p values, and shown in pink is the annual production rates. As I have told in the previous graph, when the annual production falls below a certain threshold value, then the insurance company, if there's no disagreement in just 10 days time, the reassurance companies will pay that money to the investor. It is very fast. There's no risk need for experts, and you don't need to go to the site to make the detection of the damage. So it's just on paper and based on data from satellites and agreements. So what are the advantages? The loss is covered in a very fast way, doesn't require visits to the field, and the costs of the process and the transaction is very low, and it can be used for every field very easily. There's a transparent information and data analysis, and the process is based on this transparent analysis. So it is from Mark Twain, a saying, an American philosopher. He says everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. Aslında Türk
Thank you very much. It is a product that should have been in the Turkish market already, and we are happy that it will become available in Turkey, particularly in this period that we have financing difficulties. I think we need this sort of product in our market, just like the European countries. And as investors, the financing costs and have to be considered, and the cost of this insurance has to be considered as well. So I hope it won't be very costly. So we are already behind our schedule. So I would like to give the final say to Yeşim Akçoğlu, and we have discussed a lot about Turkey, and now I would like to ask about the cash problems in the current markets, and our colleagues talked about the costs being too high. So considering all of this, for 2019, particularly for the financing of energy projects, will there be new resources in Turkey from the perspective of the World Bank? What is your projection? Thank you very much. Before proceeding with new resources, let me tell you with one slide, wind energy is a strategic priority for Turkey. Why should it keep growing, both offshore and onshore? Let me give you just a few figures on my slide. In the last 16 years, electricity demand has grown 5.6%, but there's high dependence on energy import, 37% natural gas dependence, and it decreased down to 37 from 50-60%. And as you know, for gas, we depend on imports by 99%. And in the last 9 months, the energy import amounted to $32 billion, and the energy sector constitutes 82% of the current account deficit. That is why all renewable energy resources are important for us, and wind is the most important one, actually. Of course, in the energy sector, the emissions and Turkey's climate change circumstances, Turkey will be the country affected most by climate change, so wind becomes even more important. 48 gigawatt potential is what we have. We are using only 15% of that potential right now. I wish we could realize the potential in a more efficient way. Now, about financing, what we did in the wind market and what will we continue to do in the wind bank market. We have loans and these have been provided to the private sector over the Industrial Development Bank, and we have financed 11 VPPs and with a capacity of 233 megawatts. And as I have mentioned, the banking sector isn't enough. We need new funds, funding sources. 100 million of this funding was from the Clean Technology Fund, CTF, and this way we try to contribute to the development of the market. And we also have an investment project with TWEC. It is our fifth investment project with Turkish Electricity Transmission Company, and we have a request for the sixth project. It will also focus on wind energy. And let me now speak a little about the renewable energy integration project, $300 billion worth, and there are very important investments under it. There are also upgrades and smart grid investments and RTOs, and we have also wind power grid connection substations. But for wind, what is important is that we have the wind desk under SCADA and EMS upgrade. And in İzmir, Vize and Çan, the connection substations will be finalized under this project. So we received this request for project and we have given a positive answer to their request, and these projects will be implemented in the future, and new components will be added and financing will be provided, hopefully. And also we have the IFC, which works directly with the private sector under the World Bank. IFC finance one wind power plant of 135 megawatt installed capacity. And apart from that, the World Bank provides support to the governments for reforms, and there are two topics which may be related to wind energy, actually. Not direct financing for wind, but we can say indirect. So there will be a change, an amendment of the law on renewable energy and the establishment and operationalization of EPH. And here we also provide advisory and analytical support. There are some investments about the smart grids and for TEAŞ capacity strengthening. There may be some other projects. I won't give too many details because it is still at the design phase, and the World Bank is managing many of the funds in Turkey, the technical assistance. The phase 1 is being completed, and it includes an assessment of the renewable energy market and roadmap, and now in the ongoing project we have the energy storage systems and renewable energy transmission and distribution technical assistance. And about EPH, we have other projects. The transparency platform is one of them, balancing operations, market coupling, green certificates. So these are the fields that we are in cooperation with EPH in terms of projects. So what can we do to further support Turkey in the wind energy sector? When the government makes a request, we always try to extend our support for reforms. We try to cooperate with the government. And in terms of technical assistance, wind maps and resource evaluations and tender guarantees in the transition period, support for the transition period, and pilots in new areas, new technologies. These are the areas that the World Bank can further support the Turkish wind energy sector. We are open to requests and proposals in this field because we are doing these activities in other countries of the world, and also for investments, our cooperation will continue. Now, some final remarks. The technical assistance, support for reform process, and projects all over the world. From these, we have taken some lessons. Combining investments and institutional development and capacity building will help achieve better results. Investment financing, you do it for once, and if there is no capacity building, you won't receive other applications for financing. And TİAŞ particularly is critical in Turkey because from both operational and financial point of view, there is a need for building capacity of TİAŞ, and it is better than just investing for just investments in wind energy. So building capacity would be more useful. Also, during the preparation phase, you should meet with all the stakeholders. You should have adequate time and allocate adequate resources for preparation and consultations, or you will have problems if you act in a hasty way during the preparation phase. As Mr. Deputy Minister Abdullah mentioned yesterday, there are some rules that should be decided before the implementation begins, and everyone should be announced. The rules should know the rules. This was what he said. There are some applications which exceed the capacity, and there are some delays in these applications. And if the rules were clear beforehand, if all the stakeholders knew about the rules, if the preparation was made in the right way, and if the feedbacks were provided back then, it would be better. Thank you very much for your participation. If you have any questions, I can answer them later. Thank you very much, Mrs. Yeşim. From the perspective of World Bank, you have been supporting and funding projects in Turkey, particularly interstate projects, and you have also been providing technical assistance, and this will continue, as you have mentioned. And there are also institutions affiliated to the World Bank who are providing financing to certain projects. I would like to thank all the panelists and the audience for listening to us patiently. If you have any questions, I can have a few questions for the panelists because we are already 15 minutes behind our schedule. If you have maybe just 2 questions that we can have.
Soru. Bir dakika, bir mikrofon gelince bir kendinizi tanıtırsanız.
Yenilenebilir enerji Hakan Öz.
Renewable energies, Hakan Öz. I have 2 questions actually, one for Yiğit, one for Yeşim. First, my question for Mrs. Yeşim, I would like to ask. I can see that you have a strong background and you have worked a lot on the sector. From the perspective of the World Bank, Turkey's energy market and energy sector, what are the problems in Turkish energy sector or the market? Can you share those with us? And I would like to ask Mr. Yiğit, the market prices, I can say, have led to a cut down in the loans being extended, and YEKDEM is the topic of discussion nowadays, and the lower limit is being discussed. Here, maybe if there is a lower limit in Turkish liras, bottom limit in Turkish liras? Do you think it would be sufficient of a guarantee for the guarantee bank? Would the guarantee bank undertake the parity risk there? What would your perspective be? Would you carry out some feasibility? Would you consider it as a guarantee? So, in other words, to ask this question, under the market circumstances, is there a minimum figure that you have determined? So if I take 3, I would feel assured and I could provide financing. Maybe could this be considered determining a low bottom threshold?
Başlayın isterseniz.
We can start by Yeşim Hanım. Very briefly, I'll answer your question. We are active in the energy sector as a whole, so we haven't performed a technical analysis specific to wind sector, but I can give you some examples. Some of the examples were given by me in the closing. So rather than focusing on financing of investment, it would be best to increase capacity and do some preliminary preparations, and while doing so, taking opinion of all stakeholders and receiving their feedback is very significant. We are discussing it for the last 2 days in application processes, not only for wind but also for other renewable applications. Facilitation of the applications, not resorting to 37 institutions or 30 institutions when applying, but having expedited application processes will be very good and will be beneficial. I want to answer that question. As Guarantee Bank, long-term Turkish lira financing is what we are providing. Turkish lira denominated YEKTEM, will it be possible or not? Yes, we provide Turkish lira financing, so this can be possible. However, in Turkish liras YEKTEM, the price that is determined by you, what can be the increase for dollars? We were speaking about 5 or 6% of increase rates, and you could keep it stable as $7.3. However, Turkish lira loans, there's an interest rate of 35%. So if you want it to be repaid, then there is a need for a huge increase of capital. If there are different escalations, yes, we can speak about it. However, the financing cost is very important. In merchanting financing, if you take $3, would I be comfortable? Yes, I would be comfortable, but it means that you need to provide 60% of capital. Yes, YEKA can be financed, everything can be financed. However, the model is important. With the project, you know, the payback with $7.3 or $5.4. What is important is your capital and how much capital can you contribute. I think there is no other question. Thank you very much for your attention and for your patience, and we would like to thank our panelists. We are going to present you with certificates for attendance.